The Galactic Medical Council's emergency session was unlike any other in its thousand-year history. Dozens of the most renowned xenobiologists from across known space gathered in the crystal dome chamber of New Perseus, their varied anatomies, from crystalline to gaseous, all focused on a single holographic display at the center of the room. "This cannot be accurate," declared Chief Medical Officer Valon, her bioluminescent tendrils pulsing with concern as she manipulated the three-dimensional image of human genetic structures. No spacefaring species could survive with such fundamental flaws. The evidence was overwhelming. The humans, who had recently achieved faster-than-light travel and established their first extrasolar colonies, were operating with what appeared to be severe biological disadvantages. Their bones were brittle compared to galactic standards. Their muscles required constant maintenance through physical activity. Their immune systems were almost comically aggressive, often attacking their own bodies. They needed to enter a death-like state called sleep for nearly a third of their day. They're functioning with barely half the sensory input of a standard Class 3 species, noted Dr. Xithtal, his crystalline form refracting light, as he moved closer to examine the data. Their visual spectrum is severely limited. They can't detect magnetic fields, and their proprioception is primitive at best. The council chamber erupted in overlapping voices, each specialist pointing out another apparent deficiency in human biology. Their cardiovascular system was a single point of failure. Their reproduction was inefficient and dangerous. Their digestive system required constant attention and specific environmental conditions. But it was junior researcher Kim who asked the question that silenced the chamber. Then how did they get here? Valon's tendrils ceased their anxious movement. The question hung in the air like a physical presence. The humans had indeed achieved what many other, seemingly more robust species had not. They had unified their planet, mostly, developed faster than light travel independently, and were already establishing a presence in the galactic community. Perhaps, offered Dr. Zara-9, her quantum consciousness projecting through her android form, we are asking the wrong question. Instead of wondering how they survived with these limitations, we should be asking how they thrive because of them. The hologram shifted to display human historical records. Despite their fragile bones, humans had populated every environment on their homeworld. Despite their limited senses, they had developed technology to extend their perception far beyond their biological capabilities. Despite their inefficient sleep cycles, they had maintained continuous civilization advancement through social cooperation. Look at their medical technology, Zara-9 continued. Their understanding of biological systems surpasses many Class 2 civilizations. They had to understand themselves to survive. Their space habitats, added Xithtal, are marvels of environmental engineering. Because they can't survive in most environments, they learn to build their own wherever they go. Valon studied the data with new eyes. The humans' seemingly primitive immune system had forced them to develop advanced vaccination protocols centuries before achieving spaceflight. Their limited strength had driven them to create sophisticated machines and automation. Their need for sleep had led to complex social structures ensuring continuous operation of their civilization. They're not surviving despite these conditions, she realized. They evolved this way for a reason. Every weakness forced an adaptation, an innovation. The Council's initial diagnosis of humanity as a critically disadvantaged species was being rapidly rewritten. These weren't deficiencies. They were evolutionary pressure points that had forged humanity into something unique in the galaxy. I moved to classify humans as a Category Sigma species, Valon announced, using a designation that hadn't been invoked in over 10 millennia. Their biological parameters may not match our standard metrics, but their adaptability and technological innovation mark them as something extraordinary. The motion passed unanimously. As the council dispersed, Valon remained, watching the hologram of human DNA rotating slowly in the chamber center. She couldn't help but wonder what these remarkable beings would do next, these survivors who had turned every disadvantage into a stepping stone toward the stars. What the council didn't know, couldn't know, was that their decision to classify humanity as Category Sigma would have far-reaching consequences. The galaxy was about to learn that those who evolve under constant pressure don't just survive. They emerge stronger, more resilient, and far more capable than anyone could have predicted. The story of humanity's rise in the galactic community was just beginning, and it would redefine everything the older races thought they knew about evolution, adaptation, and the true meaning of strength. The Galactic Council's decision to implement a protective quarantine around human space came 3 standard months after the Medical Council's findings. The declaration arrived at Earth's diplomatic office wrapped in layers of bureaucratic concern and patronizing goodwill. Ambassador Sarah Chen read the document for the 4th time in her office at the United Earth Embassy on New Persis, her expression growing increasingly incredulous. The stars outside her window seemed to mock the absurdity of the situation. "They want to put us in a bubble," she said to her alien colleague, Ambassador Rox of the Centaurian Alliance. "For our own protection." Rox's crystalline form shifted in what Sarah had learned was their equivalent of uncomfortable agreement. "The Council believes they're acting in humanity's best interest. The quarantine protocols are usually reserved for pre-spaceflight civilizations with severe biological vulnerabilities. The quarantine would effectively cut off all human worlds from direct contact with the wider galaxy. Trade would be conducted through automated systems, diplomatic relations would be handled via holographic communications, and human ships would be restricted to their designated safe space. What the Council hadn't counted on was humanity's reaction to being treated like children with a chronic illness. Within weeks, the human response appeared in the form of the Declaration of Human Capability, a document that would later be remembered as one of humanity's finest moments of diplomatic ingenuity. Instead of protesting the quarantine directly, humanity accepted it, with conditions. "If we are to be quarantined," the declaration stated, "we will use this opportunity to demonstrate exactly what humanity can accomplish in isolation." What followed was dubbed the quantum leap by human media. Every human world and colony redirected their efforts toward technological advancement and innovation. If they couldn't travel freely through the galaxy, they would make the galaxy come to them. The first breakthrough came in telecommunications. Human scientists, working with their limited sensory range, developed quantum entanglement communications that operated on principles the galactic community had overlooked. Their primitive need to compensate for their biological limitations had led them to explore aspects of physics that other species had never needed to consider. Next came advances in environmental engineering. Unable to survive in most alien environments without assistance, humans had already mastered the art of creating habitable spaces anywhere. During the quarantine, they perfected this technology to a degree that made their habitats more adaptable and resilient than any in known space. Dr. Maya Patel, leading the research team at the Luna Advanced Sciences Institute, explained it best. "They think our need for controlled environments is a weakness. They don't understand that this weakness has made us masters of environmental manipulation. We don't adapt to environments. We make environments adapt to us." The quarantine's turning point came 8 months in, when a crisis struck the Proxima Centauri colony. A solar flare threatened to overwhelm the colony's shields, and the nearest galactic aid was light years away, prevented from approaching by their own quarantine regulations. The humans didn't panic. Instead, they innovated. Within hours, colonial engineers had repurposed their primitive defensive systems into a network of electromagnetic deflectors that not only protected the colony, but also harvested the solar energy for future use. The galactic community watched in astonishment as the humans turned a potential disaster into a technological advancement. "Fascinating," noted Valon, reviewing the incident reports. "They transformed a survival response into a technological leap forward. It's as if the pressure of potential failure actually enhances their performance." But it was the psychological impact of the quarantine that truly revealed humanity's unique character. Instead of feeling isolated and restricted, human communities used the opportunity to strengthen their internal bonds and develop new forms of cultural expression. They turned their quarantine zones into crucibles of creativity and innovation. The quarantine had been intended to protect a supposedly vulnerable species. Instead, it had created an incubator for human potential. Every limitation became a challenge to overcome, every restriction a puzzle to solve. Ambassador Chen's final report to the Galactic Council was a masterpiece of diplomatic understatement. We appreciate your concern for our well-being. However, we feel compelled to point out that humanity has never responded well to being told what we cannot do. It tends to make us rather determined to prove otherwise. As the first year of quarantine drew to a close, the galaxy was beginning to realize that they had fundamentally misunderstood something about human nature. They had assumed that a species with so many apparent biological limitations would be grateful for protection. Instead, they had given humanity exactly what it needed to demonstrate its greatest strength, the ability to turn restrictions into opportunities. The quarantine would last another 6 months before events forced the Council to reconsider their position. But by then, humanity had already proven what they had known all along. They didn't need protection. They needed challenges, and the galaxy had just given them a perfect one. The Alcyon sector was considered uninhabitable by most galactic standards. Intense radiation from 3 pulsars made conventional shielding useless, and the complex gravitational interactions between nearby binary systems created navigation hazards that even AI pilots struggled to manage. It was precisely the kind of place humanity decided to prove a point. Operation Breakthrough began 18 months into the quarantine, when human ships were detected on the edge of the Alcyon sector. The Galactic Council's response was immediate and predictable. They sent ships to intercept what they assumed was a desperate attempt to break quarantine. What they found instead was the INS Copernicus, a research vessel specifically designed for the hostile conditions of Alcyon. Its hull was lined with revolutionary adaptive shielding that used the very radiation that made the sector dangerous as a power source. The navigation system, guided by human pilots working in concert with AI, treated the gravitational anomalies as highways rather than hazards. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Copernicus, watching the Council ships approach on her holographic display. "They still think we're trying to escape," she remarked to her executive officer, Commander James Chen. "They don't understand that we're not running from anything. We're running toward something." That something was the Alcyon anomaly, a phenomenon at the sector's heart that had puzzled galactic scientists for millennia. The conditions that made the sector lethal to most species had prevented any detailed study, but humans, with their primitive biology and limited senses, had developed technologies and methods specifically designed to operate in such extreme conditions. The Council's response to the Copernicus expedition was to send Valon herself as an emergency envoy. Her arrival on the human vessel marked the first direct contact between humans and the galactic community since the quarantine began. "You must understand," Valon insisted during her meeting with Captain Rodriguez, her bioluminescent tendrils pulsing with genuine concern. "These conditions are beyond even our technological capabilities to safely manage. Your biological limitations are precisely why we're going to succeed," Rodriguez interrupted. She pulled up a holographic display of human medical data. "Our limited biology forced us to develop technologies that work with minimal sensory input. Our primitive immune system taught us to create adaptive protection systems. Everything you see as a weakness, we've turned into a tool." The discussion was interrupted by alarms. A massive gravitational wave was approaching, the kind that would typically tear a ship apart. The Council vessels began emergency retreat procedures, but the Copernicus did something unexpected. It turned toward the wave. "What are you doing?" Valon demanded, her tendrils flaring in alarm. Rodriguez smiled, "Showing you why humans never really needed protecting." The Copernicus's systems engaged. Instead of fighting the gravitational wave, the ship's computers, designed by humans who had evolved to find patterns in chaos, calculated precisely how to ride it. The wave that should have destroyed them instead carried them deeper into the sector, using less energy than conventional propulsion would have required. Valon watched in astonishment as human crew members calmly performed their duties, their supposedly fragile bodies protected by technology that had evolved from their very limitations. They weren't just surviving in conditions that the galaxy's most advanced species considered impossible. They were thriving. The breaking point came not from failure, but from success. As the Copernicus penetrated deeper into the Altian sector than any ship in recorded history, the galaxy was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. They had fundamentally misunderstood the relationship between limitation and advancement. The data the Copernicus sent back was revolutionary. Human scientists, accustomed to working with limited sensory information, discovered patterns in the Altian anomaly that other species had missed. Their primitive approach to problem-solving, evolved from dealing with their own biological constraints, provided insights that would revolutionize galactic understanding of space-time itself. But perhaps more importantly, the Copernicus expedition forced the galactic community to confront their own prejudices. They had assumed that biological limitations meant evolutionary disadvantage. Humanity had proved that limitations could be the mother of innovation. As the Copernicus continued its mission, now supported rather than opposed by council ships, Valon composed a message to the Galactic Council that would change the course of interstellar relations. We have been approaching this entirely backward. We saw humanity's adaptations as evidence of their weakness. We should have recognized them as proof of their strength. They don't need our protection. They never did. What they need is our recognition of what they truly are, not a species limited by their biology, but one that has transcended it. The quarantine would end not with a diplomatic agreement or a political decision, but with a fundamental shift in understanding. Humanity had proven that their greatest strength lay not in what they could naturally do, but in what they had learned to do because of what they couldn't. The Proxima Centauri research station had become an unlikely hub of galactic cooperation in the months following the Copernicus expedition. Species from across known space gathered there, drawn by the revolutionary insights humanity had gained from the Altian anomaly. But no one expected these insights would become crucial to the galaxy's survival. The first signs of the crisis appeared in the form of subtle quantum fluctuations across multiple sectors. Most species' advanced sensing systems dismissed these as background noise. It was a human physicist, Dr. Aisha Rahman, who first recognized the pattern, precisely because human sensory limitations had taught them to look for meanings in seemingly random data. It's like learning to read body language, she explained to a gathering of galactic scientists. When you can't naturally sense someone's electromagnetic field or chemical signatures, you learn to notice the subtle things others might overlook. The fluctuations were symptoms of something far more serious. Microscopic tears in the fabric of space-time, spreading like cracks in ice. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations, with their hypersensitive detection systems, were overwhelmed by the sheer volume of data. But humans, used to filtering out noise and focusing on essential patterns, saw what others couldn't. Dr. Rahman's team identified the source. The cumulative effect of millions of faster-than-light jumps had created a network of quantum instabilities. The galaxy's older species, with their more refined and efficient FTL systems, had never noticed the problem. But humans, with their crude and inefficient early FTL drives, had inadvertently discovered the issue during their attempts to improve their technology. Our inefficiency saved us, explained Dr. Marcus Chen, lead engineer of the Human Galactic Joint Research Initiative. Because our early FTL drives were so rough, we had to develop incredibly sophisticated monitoring systems to prevent tear events. We were looking for problems that more advanced species systems were too refined to detect. The crisis reached its peak when a major shipping lane collapsed, creating a cascading failure that threatened to tear apart several densely populated sectors. The galaxy's most advanced species found their sophisticated technologies useless. Their sensors were too perfect, their systems too refined to handle the chaotic quantum fluctuations. That's when humanity's primitive approach proved invaluable. Human ships, designed to function with limited sensory input and redundant safety systems, could navigate the increasingly unstable space. Human engineers, accustomed to working with imperfect data, developed protocols to stabilize the tiers that other species' automated systems couldn't handle. The solution came from an unexpected source: human sleep patterns. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a neurobiologist, made the connection while studying the quantum fluctuations. "The patterns reminded me of brain activity during sleep cycles," she observed. "Just as our brains need downtime to reorganize neural pathways, space-time itself needs periods of quantum reorganization." The human concept of rest periods was foreign to many galactic species whose biology allowed for continuous activity. But this very limitation had given humanity insight into a fundamental aspect of universe mechanics that other species had never considered. The solution was elegantly simple: coordinated rest periods in FTL travel, allowing space-time to naturally repair quantum tiers during scheduled downtime. It was a solution that could only have come from a species that understood the necessity of rhythmic cycles of activity and rest. Admiral Valon, who had once catalogued humanity's need for sleep as a critical weakness, found herself addressing the Galactic Council with a very different perspective. The humans' biological limitations forced them to understand something fundamental about the universe that we, in our biological and technological sophistication, had overlooked. The cosmos itself operates on cycles of activity and recovery, much like the human sleep cycle. The implementation of the quantum rest protocol marked a turning point in galactic history. For the first time, the most advanced civilizations found themselves adopting practices based on human biology. The scheduled downtimes in FTL travel, originally seen as an inconvenient necessity, led to new discoveries about the nature of space-time itself. But perhaps more significantly, it forced the galaxy to recognize that evolution had many paths to advancement. The very traits they had dismissed as primitive: limited senses, cycling rest periods, redundant systems, had proven to be sophisticated adaptations that granted unique insights into the universe's functioning. Dr. Raman, speaking at the ceremony marking the successful stabilization of the quantum tiers, summed it up best: "We never needed to overcome our limitations. We needed to understand that they weren't limitations at all. They were specializations that gave us a unique perspective on the universe. Sometimes, seeing less lets you understand more." The crisis had revealed a truth that would reshape galactic society. There was no single path to advancement. The very differences that had once been used to justify humanity's quarantine had become the key to the galaxy's survival. It was a lesson that would fundamentally change how species viewed each other and themselves. 5 years after the quantum crisis, the Great Hall of New Perseus hosted an unprecedented gathering. Representatives from every known spacefaring species assembled to witness the inauguration of the first human chairperson to the Galactic Council. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the former captain of the Copernicus, stood before the assembled delegates, her fragile human frame drawing every eye in the vast chamber. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The species once quarantined for their own protection now held one of the highest positions in galactic governance. But the true significance ran deeper than mere political advancement. "We gather here not just to mark a political milestone," Rodriguez began, her voice carrying across the chamber, "but to acknowledge a fundamental shift in how we understand evolution, adaptation, and the very nature of advancement itself." The hall's holographic displays showed scenes from the past 5 years. Human-designed habitats becoming the new standard for deep space exploration, the implementation of the quantum rest protocol that had saved countless lives, and the revolutionary medical techniques developed from studying humanity's aggressive immune system. "When we first joined the galactic community," Rodriguez continued, "our biology was seen as a collection of deficiencies. Our need for sleep was considered a weakness. Our limited senses were viewed as primitive. Our constant need to adapt and modify our environment was thought to be a sign of poor evolution." Valon, now serving as the head of the Galactic Medical Council, nodded from her position near the front. Her tendrils glowed with what humans had learned to recognize as pride. Pride in how wrong they had all been. But what we've learned, Rodriguez said, is that evolution doesn't follow a single path. What appears as weakness in one context can be strength in another. Our need for sleep led us to understand fundamental truths about the universe's need for recovery cycles. Our limited senses taught us to look deeper, to find patterns others might miss. Our constant adaptation made us masters of environmental engineering. The displays shifted to show the latest breakthrough, the Human Perspective Protocol, a revolutionary approach to problem solving that was being adopted across the galaxy. It deliberately incorporated what had once been seen as human limitations, using them as tools to find solutions that purely logical or technologically advanced approaches might miss. We didn't succeed despite our biology, Rodriguez explained. We succeeded because of it. Every adaptation, every limitation, every supposed weakness forced us to innovate, to think differently, to find new ways forward. And in doing so, we discovered aspects of the universe that other approaches had overlooked. The new understanding had led to dramatic changes across galactic society. Species began deliberately incorporating periods of reduced activity, finding that it improved their cognitive functions and technological innovations. The practice of creating sensory-limited environments became popular among researchers who discovered that reducing their natural capabilities often led to unexpected insights. But perhaps the most important lesson, Rodriguez continued, is that diversity, true diversity, isn't just about accepting different forms of advancement. It's about recognizing that what we consider advancement itself might need to be redefined. She gestured to the assembled delegates, each unique in their biology and evolution. Look around this chamber. Each species here represents a different solution to the challenge of survival and advancement. Each apparent limitation is actually a specialization, a unique lens through which to view and understand the universe. The Great Hall erupted in approval, a cacophony of sounds, lights, and electromagnetic pulses that represented applause across dozens of species. It was a far cry from the cautious isolation humanity had faced just a few years earlier. As the ceremony concluded, Dr. Raman, who had first identified the quantum fluctuations, approached Rodriguez with a data crystal, the final results from the latest Alcyon sector expedition. The mission had been crewed by a deliberately diverse team, each species chosen not despite their limitations, but because of them. You know what the most interesting finding was? Raman asked with a smile. The universe itself isn't optimized. It's full of inefficiencies, limitations, and apparent flaws. But those very imperfections are what make it work. Just like us, the galaxy had come to understand that humanity's story wasn't about overcoming limitations. It was about recognizing that limitations themselves were just another form of specialization. Their supposedly flawed biology had given them insights that had saved the galaxy. Their need to constantly adapt and innovate had made them masters of change in an ever-evolving universe. As Rodriguez left the Great Hall that evening, she passed the medical bay where she had once been examined as a potentially deficient species. The sign above the door had been changed. It now read, Center for Evolutionary Diversity Studies. The galaxy had finally understood. There was no such thing as a universal standard for biological advancement. Every species' path was unique, and every limitation could be a gateway to understanding something new about the universe. Humanity hadn't just earned its place among the stars. It had helped the galaxy itself evolve into something greater. The quarantine that had once been meant to protect humanity had instead protected the galaxy from its own prejudices, and in doing so, it had revealed a truth that would guide galactic civilization forward. True strength lies not in perfection, but in how we turn our imperfections into advantages.